Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted and privileged to have a conversation with Joelle Casteix. Hey, Joelle, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Now, to go over Joelle's bio, well, you're based out of California, and Joelle is a leading global expert, author, and keynote speaker for survivors of child sexual assault and institutional cover-up. She's the founding member of the board of directors of the Zero Abuse Project, helped launch Zero Abuse AI, and is furthermore the chief content officer of Spot the Line. She's written a number of books on this topic, like The Power of Responsibility, The Well-Armored Child, and Scrum, which we'll cover later during the interview. And she qualifies herself as an author, speaker, advocate, and accidental activist. Hey, Joelle, welcome to the show. I really want to start with that last statement. You qualify yourself as an accidental activist. Please explain.
Well, this wasn't the plan, what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
It's funny because I've learned that people gravitate towards their passions, whether those be hobbies or avocations. And my job was going to be, I was in marketing and PR, and I was a writer, and I was just plugging along. And then when I came forward publicly as a survivor of child sexual abuse, I really, in many ways, found my calling, because I realized that there were so many people who didn't have a voice, and so many people who just didn't have the capabilities or the strength or the healing or anything to be able to go out and get in people's face and say, hey, we have a real problem here. And so it was a total accident. I look back at my career, people are like, oh, how'd you get into this? What'd you major in? I'm like, English.
Yeah.
So it was totally accidental. And no one, our world is changing at such an amazing pace that I think that, even though I went into activism and to, advocating on behalf of child sex abuse victims, most people are in jobs that didn't even exist 20 years ago. So I think it's really a testament to our changing world and flexible times. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Now I understand the accidental part, although you've mentioned it, but I really want to go back to the beginning, because I find it quite a hard, difficult topic to discuss, at least from my side. But you are yourself a survivor of sexual child abuse, a victim. But looking at a couple of the interviews you've done in the past, you actually want to avoid the word victim. So what's the best way to describe what you are in this case?
Well, words are very, very powerful things. And the English language is very, very specific. We have a whole lot of words that really specify people, and we tend to label people a lot. So when we look at victim and the connotation of the word victim, it's someone that something bad has happened to them, and they are not the action taker in that description. And so, you can be a victim of crime, a victim of murder, a victim of robbery, a victim of child sexual abuse. But instead, if we take those words and change it to survivor, that shows that the person, the individual who this bad thing happened to, is taking the initiative to move and grow and thrive and move beyond. We see that in people who have had terrible diseases, cancer. I'm a cancer survivor. Well, if you say cancer victim, people think, oh, that person is dead. If you say cancer survivor, it means that person is alive and growing. And we're trying to apply that also to the child sex abuse and sexual assault movement, because it's very easy for people to get, number one, stuck in the vortex of victimhood. Mm-hmm. Not to get all metaphysical, but if you're in a bad place, bad things tend to happen to you. And so we want to get people to break out of that and really take back their power, because when you take back your power and you inform communities, you protect kids, number one, and you discourage further predation, number two. And so that's why we really like to use the word survivor. Some people take it one step further and say thriver, but it's like, yeah, of course I thrive. That's a whole different track. But it's really survivor puts the person in the driver's seat, and that's what we really want to happen.
Got that. Okay, now this covers the part being a victim or survivor of sexual assault, but as mentioned, you are also an expert on the institutional cover-up.
Yes.
Please expand on that. What does that mean?
Well, we have found, and this happens in any institution. I mostly focus on the Catholic Church, but we have seen it in the Boy Scouts of America and the U.S. Olympic teams, and any institution that seems to wield some kind of power and have a hierarchy structure. They are very quick to cover up the abuse and to defend the predator and to not believe the child. And this happens for a number of reasons. In the Catholic Church, we find that this happens because it's this 2,000-year history of a male-dominated hierarchy where the role of women and children is always seen as secondary and protecting their own is important. In other institutions, it's about money. In others, it's solely reputation. The Boy Scouts of America, the last thing they wanted to do was have people find out that they had volunteers who were sexually abusing kids. And we see this in all kinds. We even see this in white collar crime. One of the least reported crimes up there with child sexual abuse is embezzlement. People won't report it because they don't want people to know. And so I understand that child predators do exist, and they are everywhere. And we need to arm and equip our children to be powerful human beings who can, repel predators. So a predator may have 50 victims, but an institution could have 50 predators. And once they have one, they'll have more because they put operations in place that cover it up. And I can handle the fact that there are some people who will do bad things. Mm-hmm. I cannot handle it when people who call themselves good do bad things for what they think is a good reason. And when I say that, that usually ends up being the cover-up of abuse. And it's astounding how common it is that people will rally around a predator because of whatever reason. Maybe that predator groomed them into thinking that they were a good person. Maybe that predator had a great deal of power. We just had a huge scandal in New York with the governor there. And so I can understand that there will be people who will hurt kids, but man, don't lie to me. I hate it when people lie to me. And I will do whatever I can to expose it because, parents and people put a lot of trust in these institutions, and these institutions hold themselves up to a higher standard. And we should ensure that they maintain that higher standard because it's so much easier in the long run to pick up the phone and call the police than it is to clean up after a predator for 20 years. And it really forces us to look at who is more important in this equation, the predator or the child. And we really need to take both the long view and the short view and really value our children who are coming forward to report.
Wow. Now, to ensure that you can help society mitigate the risks and taking these people off the street, one of the organizations you set up was the Zero Abuse Project. The name assumes what it's about, but I also understand you're using technology to help you there. Could you take the audience a little bit what you're doing there?
Well, technology tends to be portrayed as the bad guy many times because it does allow people access to, it puts the world in the palm of your hand, especially for children. And that means that anyone can access them. But at the same time, it gives everybody amazing tools and third-party verification of bad behavior that can be stopped. And so the thesis behind the Zero Abuse Project is currently, the AI portion is on hiatus, but it's public data that we're taking, 50 years worth. And it comes from something called the OCD, which is the Official Catholic Directory. And the Catholic Church in the United States, in order to file their income taxes, has to tell us exactly where every priest is and every school and every property and everything else. So we can take 50 years of that data and digitize it and use AI to determine patterns. Mm-hmm. And those patterns will tell us about the movements of priests from year to year. Now you say, well, why is that important? Well, it doesn't say, it won't tell us, oh, this guy's a predator. But what it will do is first, we'll be able to look at the guys who we know are predators, who've been arrested and sued by numerous children, stuff like that. And we can determine their pattern of movement. And what that will do is that will tell us, in many instances, what the institution did when they found out that this person was sexually molesting children. And so we can see, they start moving from year to year, or they go to certain states where there are recovery centers for priests. He has a drinking problem. No, it's not a drinking problem. And so what that does is it won't say, well, that guy's a predator, but it will point out patterns that say, gosh, this guy could be a real problem. And then what it'll do is, so the AI first, we have patterns that we know, but of course people have inherent bias. What are the patterns we don't know? And that's what the AI will hopefully be able to tell us when this project is fully in fruition. And AI also gets a bad rap. People are very, very scared about it. And really, it's just the usage of large amount of data to determine patterns. And so we'll find that will even be helpful for in my other project right now, Spot the Line, because we're developing software that will allow people to, our first product will be sexual harassment. So people in the workplace will be able to go through questionnaires and see if they are subject to sexual harassment. And the other one will be predatory grooming, which is the means by which a predator tricks a kid into thinking child sex abuse is okay. So yeah, sure. So the number one benefit is that the person who uses the software says, hey, I'm not crazy. Something bad is really happening here. I have third-party verification. I'm going to report. This is what it says. Human resources has to believe me. The school has to believe me. I have something to stand on. But the other thing is that data can show us where the patterns are. So if we, with the full cooperation of the people who use it in the institutions, because we're hoping that institutions will actually use this software because it's a deterrent, they will be able to see what the patterns are in their organization. They're like, gosh, we have a lot of sexual harassment at this location. What's going on here? What are the patterns? What do we see? How did it start? How can we intervene before it even starts in these other places where we're not seeing reporting? And so it's the power of information, and it will help us, eliminate our biases, because, we go into institutions and jobs and everything else and think it's going to be great. The Boy Scouts are great. Eagle Scouts would never hurt me. Or, I work for Apple, and Apple's all about diversity and inclusion. Nothing could ever happen to me. Well, it does happen. And so if we can identify those patterns and empower people to report, then what we can do is create workplaces and institutions that are safer, that are more, they're more cooperative, and also empower those organizations that when they go through the interview process or when they have issues coming up later on, that they can take people who might be perceived to be a problem and be like, hey, let's work through this. Let's look at, and it's all about education and teaching and intervention. It isn't about pointing fingers.
Wow. Yeah. So now I fully understand this is a must for society to take this out as much as you can. I don't think we'll ever go to zero, absolutely, but if we can,
it's aspirational.
Yeah. That's very much aspirational. I know, I understand that. Now, for the Zero Abuse Project is looking at a large piece of data and then assessing, hey, could something be happening here? So that does require data. Now, is data always available? So to what extent are examples like Boy Scouts you mentioned, or the Catholic Church, are those examples, or are there much more data sets you can make use of to detect this?
We have real data for the Catholic Church. And it's a very unique case because the Catholic Church is very hierarchical, is very organized, has documentation on everybody. They have, it's very much run like the Roman Empire. They have the Vatican in Rome and the rules come down. And so that actually is very beneficial in a way because, you know, they kept records of everything. So we can go through and see what's going on. In other places, such as the Boy Scouts or the US Olympic Committee or the Boys and Girls Club of America, which has not had a scandal, but they are not, if it's a volunteer, they may not have that same 50 years of record keeping. But many times we find the patterns are the same. So we can apply those patterns to other organizations. And we can say, you know, we saw this, 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 and this. And we can exclude the top 3 patterns because those are exclusive to the Catholic Church. But we were able to determine these other 5 patterns that we never thought of before. And then you can apply those to other institutions. It's more of a, it isn't as empowering as putting it in the palm of people's hands like the Spot the Line does. Mm-hmm. But it's a powerful data set that can inform organizations that they might have problems. So it really depends on the power of the data and how that data is used.
Okay. Now, I'm just guessing here, but once you, I mean, to what extent, once you discover something, do you need to go to the authorities or do you need to go to the organization itself? And what could be the consequences? I mean, would they welcome you? I mean, how did the organization you've just mentioned, how did they view you? Did they welcome you or did they try to shove you away?
Most organizations have to be open to it.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church isn't exactly excited about this. And, you know, because they see it as that they're being picked on. And of course, they're not being picked on. They have the data and we understand the patterns and there is a real problem there. We're finding more and more, especially in the United States, because we tend to be very litigious and we tend to, you know, use the civil justice system a lot more, that they are finding that using tools such as Zero Abuse AI when it's available or the Spot the Line tools is a prevention tool that can reduce costs in the long run. Because I hate to say this, you know, if you go to an organization and say you have to do the right thing, they're going to be like, okay, we'll try. But if you go in and say, you have to do the right thing, and it's going to save you X million dollars a year in insurance and litigation and retention and hiring and blah, 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 people are going to go, oh, bring it on. Let's see. Yeah. And so you have to appeal to both sides of that. And that's something that it took me a while to understand, that people, especially in business, when they put their business hats on, they think differently. And it's like, you know, yeah, sure, your program's great, but, you know, it's going to cost us money. I'll never get approval. Well, if you come in and you appeal to the bottom line of a business and say, hey, your most valuable resource and asset isn't your data, it isn't the furniture in your office, it's your people. And we can ensure that you retain them, that they build a great culture, that they feel safe, your insurance costs go down, and you won't be sued later on. Plus, you know, just the bonus points of everyone saying you're the best workplace in the world. So if you appeal to the bottom line, yes, you're accepted much more. In the Catholic Church, for them, because they have such a long history, and because there's such a set of blinders on, because they this is something they're like, oh, but we fingerprint all our volunteers and everyone goes through training and this and that and the other. And I continually say it's not called a volunteer sex abuse crisis. It's called a clergy sex abuse crisis. Okay. And the reason is because it's the clergy mostly doing it. And so those are the people that you really have to, you know, nurture and train into healthy ways of interacting with people. And so they don't see it, and it'll take time, and it may not be in my lifetime, but, you know, I look at how dramatically things have changed in the past 20 years. Like, for example, in some communities in the United States, all the technology in the world is not going to be very, very helpful. There's in the Spanish-speaking communities in Los Angeles and close to the border, we're looking at people who are living, day to day, day laborers, people, multiple families in a single dwelling, and many don't speak English. They don't have access to the internet. And so to reach out to them, you really have to go back to methods like going out in front of a church and giving them a flyer and saying a really bad person worked here. And I did that this past Sunday, which I haven't done in years because normally I'm very technologically based, but I had to go back to the Stone Ages because I had to meet these people where they were at. And it was astounding to me how so much has changed just even in the past 5 years. Because instead of people saying, how dare you talk about this at church, I was getting hugs. People were coming up to me and saying, my son was abused. I'm scared. I think my brother was abused. How do I get help? Yeah. And so it's, and technology's biggest goal is to really figure out how to meet these people where they are. And right now it means it's that technology is Joelle standing out in front and handing them a piece of paper in Spanish they can read. But hopefully the goal of technology is that we will be able to reach them, because the conventional wisdom is getting there. We're getting the support and we're getting the buy-in, but it's really reaching them and empowering them to do something that's a next big step.
Wow. Now you've talked about examples predominantly from the States. Have you been able to also look at other cultures outside the US and see if you could use the technology, the patterns to also recognize it in other parts?
Yeah, a lot of it really depends on the laws that protect people. We find in Western Europe, and it's, very, very easy for things to translate. Canada, very easy for things to translate. In some countries that are very technologically focused, we'll have a lot of luck. But then there are places where we really need to help make the cultural shift as well. So when we're looking at a country that, doesn't value the voice of women, that doesn't value the victimization, or doesn't say the children are victimized and we need to help them, doesn't have a trauma-informed approach, then it won't be very effective. But it's funny, human beings they love patterns and they follow them all the time. We love our routines. And so what we see in the Catholic Church, you'll see other places, even though, it could be a very wealthy church in Newport Beach, California, or we could be in Indonesia in a small village, and the people will cover it up. It's all the same, because it's all about protecting the greater group.
So hearing this, well, first of all, where do you draw your inspiration from, by the way?
It changes all the time. At first, when I first came forward, it was about having somebody hear me. Just hear me, because for so many years, nobody listened to me, and everyone's, and when I say everyone, I mean my parents, my peers, said that the abuse was my fault, that I asked for it, that I was a bad person, I was broken, I was intrinsically flawed. And so that words are powerful and they stick. So when I first came forward, it was like, hey, this is my story. It really happened, and you can't do this to me anymore. Then it grew into this, oh my God, it's happening everywhere. And I can do something to help at least one person every day. And it tends to be, it sounds very, new agey, but there's nothing altruistic about altruism. You help people because it makes you feel good. And so that's where I get my inspiration from now. And then when I had my son, I found myself getting inspiration from other parents who were like, Joelle, how do you know all this stuff about keeping kids safe? How can you so they inspire me. My son, as he's gotten older, he inspires me because he's this funny, interesting individual who has really funny, cool friends. And I can see myself at their age, and I see how much better equipped they are to handle certain situations. And so he inspires me. And so every day it's like, it's somebody new that says, hey, can you help? And I found that just by, sharing what I know and getting it out to as many people as possible, we can really make big changes. And so that's, my inspiration every day.
Okay. And sharing what you know, you do that through your books, you do that through speaking engagements, and also providing solutions, technologies to actually get it scaled up.
Yes.
In that context, what does success mean for you?
Success for me means that I look in the mirror every day and say, I did the right thing.
Yeah.
And that's tended to be, a little bit of a deterrent when it came to my career in corporate America.
Yeah.
Because I'm very much a whistleblower. I do not like wrongdoing. And when I see it, I call it out. I don't like underhandedness. And so if I were, God forbid, hit by a truck tomorrow, I would, say I did everything I could to make the world a little bit of a better place. And I did that without sacrificing those I love, because what we see in any survivors movement or advocacy movement, they tend to sacrifice their families on the altar of the movement. And we don't, because it's, when I look at my son, he is the number one thing that I will create in this world. So he's my number one goal. So if I can, do the right thing, raise a son who people want to be around and who's happy in his heart, and have a good marriage and family, that's success.
The great definition of success. Now, we're talking in the context of the brand called you. What's your brand?
It's interesting. My brand has evolved over the years, and I'm author, speaker, advocate, and as technology has advanced, it's allowed me to take my brand and apply it to other things. So my work in technology, my work as a writer, but my brand is that I'm a voice first and foremost. So if we need to take information and get it out on an important subject, I'm that person, especially when it comes to child sexual abuse.
But it's also always about child sexual abuse. Now, the saying goes, time heals all wounds. So continuously asserting yourself with your own past, doesn't that stop you from healing from this, or is that done?
No, it's healing and forgiveness and things like that are achieved through action. So I don't wake up in the morning and say, okay, I have to think about what happened to me when I was a teenager so that I can move on with my day. No, it really is. I equated to this. My dad had open heart surgery, and he was in a rehab hospital, and he's laying in the bed, and he's like, oh, I'm going to die. I'm like, no, you're not going to die, but you got to get out of bed and move, because if you don't move, your muscles are going to atrophy, and you're going to have problems, and you won't be able to move around again. It's the same way with what I'm doing. You have to keep moving and growing. And I found that in the work that I've done, I've been able to meet and interact with some of the most amazing people out there. Because you don't sit around and talk about abuse. No one really wants to sit around and talk about the intrinsic horror of child sexual abuse. And that's not the work that I do. I'm not a therapist. I'm not I'm not a clinician. I don't do studies on this stuff. But what I do is my whole work is about the healing side. And so it's all about that movement and growth towards healing and empowerment. And, it's the more you move and the more you do, the stronger you become. And so had I just sat there and done nothing, but no, it's really been very, very helpful for healing. And even on a more practical level, the more you learn and study, the more you realize, hey, I'm not alone. It wasn't my fault. What happened to me happens to a lot of other people. and it doesn't become my burden anymore. So.
Okay, got that. The way you just described yourself, I'm starting to sense a little bit why some people qualify themselves as thriving beyond surviving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, it's, we tend to label ourselves. Everyone, because you even asked me, what's your brand? What do you call yourself? How do you identify yourself? And that's hard, it's to try to figure out, what am I? And for many people, saying thriver is super duper important, because it gets rid of not only victim, but also survivor. And shows that, that's just all back there. And yeah. I honor it and I know it, but my world is about thriving. And for me, it's kind of the same way. I just think it's too many words, so I just stick with survivor. But I've also been able to do so much that writing and speaking and doing things like this, and I have a podcast. So it's like I'm a lot of things. And one of the toughest questions that I get people ask me, well, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, well, do you have an hour? Because it could take some time to get it all out there. It's like, I do a lot of things. You can't really put it in so I guess one of my big goals is to be able to put my brand into an elevator statement. But right now it's working for me. So,
well, it's definitely working. You've got me thinking. Well, first of all, I realized the world is not as innocent as sometimes I hope it is. You've actually described a world which is a little bit scarier than I wish for, but what's your final takeaway for the audience? Is it really that bad, or what's your...
Well, I come from the viewpoint that fear never saved a child from abuse. And the reason that we have all this information now, and the reason that we're hearing about these scandals now, is not because the scandals are getting worse, but because survivors are becoming more empowered and coming together and speaking out. And so those are tremendously good things, because abuse was happening in the 1950s. But people like my parents were saying, oh, no, abuse doesn't happen here. No, it just didn't happen to you. Yeah. And so I think that with technology, with continued conversations like this, conversations in the family, conversations with my son, conversations out in the community, the more that we acknowledge that abuse exists, the more that we can deter predation. We can, tell predators, you're not hanging around here. We can empower our kids to repel bad people, and we can stop the cycle. And just acknowledging, it seems scary, but, kids are not being kidnapped in the United States off the street and sold into sex slavery. They're not. But a lot of parents believe that because they watch too much television. Really, the world is such an exciting place, because we're putting great technology into people's hands so they can communicate, so they can build communities, so they can talk about what happened to them, so they can get legal help, so they can come forward, and so that they can protect kids right now.
Hey, Joelle, I want to thank you so much for your time. Even in the context of the topic, it was a great pleasure to talk to you, and really so happy you shared your insights with us. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.